Welcome to Productly Speaking, the podcast with real stories from real product people about the messy, surprising, and occasionally brilliant work of building things. I'm your host, Carl Abbott. Here we have no perfect processes, no polished answers, just honest conversations and lessons learned the hard way. Let's give this a go. Today I'm joined once again by Katie Tamblin, a seasoned data and software advisor with over 2 decades of experience leading teams across product, data science, technology, and marketing, and the author of The Lean Agile Dilemma. Katie, welcome back. You survived the last episode, so we're doing this again.
I did, and thank you so much for having me back. I had a great time speaking with you last time.
Yeah, well, your insights always spark such great conversations, and today we're picking up right where we left off in season 4. I mean, quite literally, this topic was the answer to the question of what you would give a TED Talk on was balance. And that's the very thing that we're going to explore today. Balance not just in life, but in the world of product management. Balance shapes how we influence, connect, and create, and it can make all the difference when navigating stressful situations and complex people dynamics. Let's start with a big picture question. What does balance mean to you in the context of product management?
I've always thought of product managers and the role of product management as a balancing act, because product sits at the intersection of most of the other teams in your organization. So it's about balancing the priorities, the needs, the desires, the wants, the requirements of your operations team, your sales team, your external customers, your marketing team, everybody else you can think of that I haven't mentioned. Because these days, product and especially software product powers back office functions as well as customer facing functions. So it's kind of everywhere. And so in my experience as a product manager, I've always been trying to balance out priorities, cost benefits, all of these things. So I think it's incredibly important for this role in particular. And what I've observed is that while it's so important for this role, it's often out of whack in these teams. So what I most often see is a aspirational, overstuffed product roadmap because it's so hard for product managers to say no. Often they don't even have the agency. A lot of budgets, a lot of plans are set top down. So it's just go deliver this. And it leads to unrealistic expectations, which pulls us out of balance.
Yeah, there's a lot that we could unpack there because there's just the how do you end up in a world you're a product manager and you don't have the agency to say no, or you don't want to say no because you're afraid of the pushback and how that can get that out of balance. But why is balance so important to our field and in general?
I think because product sits at the intersection of everything, it's important that we are honest and realistic in our expectation setting in order to serve our internal and external customers the best we can. But I also think balance is incredibly important on a performance level. So a lot of your listeners will have heard of the concept of peak performance. It's something, of course, that was born out of physical activity measurement and athletes. How do you achieve your optimal athletic performance? But it's been applied more and more in the workplace. And just as a recapper for those that are unfamiliar, you have a kind of a bell curve or U-shaped curve where at the far left, where performance and pressure are low, you have people who are not reaching their potential, aren't pushed beyond, anything, don't really ever reach their full potential. At the top of the bell curve is your optimal performance, where people have enough stress, and usually it's referred to as intermittent stress. These kind of, you're just pushing somebody to reach their full potential. But on the right side of that bell curve is strain and burnout. So when people are chronically pushed and chronically under pressure, their performance falls off a cliff. And I think there's a similar curve for resilience. So I think people who are naturally resilient can maybe last a little bit longer at kind of peak resilience and peak performance under chronic stress. But even your most capable, most resilient employees, if they are under chronic stress for project after project after project after missed deadline after missed deadline and more pressure piling on to just deliver, people burn out. And then their performance, you get worse and you are more likely to miss your deadlines, more likely to mess up your projects and not be able to deliver because the people on the team are simply in what is called the zone of delusion in peak performance speak. And so I think it's incredibly important that we maintain balance in our expectations as well as in our roles in order to empower our teams to actually deliver.
Yeah, I've kind of seen this a little bit myself recently here because with AI tools really starting to help make you move faster because now you can get through some of the less desirable tasks a little bit quicker and you can move into more of the strategic thought. That AI is another source of information and it's another source of things that now you have to do because the AI often spits out so much that to consume everything that it brings in to the table, you're now getting pushed even further. And I've realized now that with AI, while it's a great tool and it can definitely help move you forward, there is a point where the AI can go way faster than you and it never stops and it never runs out of steam or energy. And you can get to a point where you're like, okay, stop, stop, stop. I can't do anymore. And I think that realistically on this whole like AI topic, yes, an AI as a co-pilot is a great thing. It empowers people to do more, but we still have our human limits that are going to come into play there. And I think that that's the wall we're realistically going to hit.
Yes, and I think what AI does is it really hones or isolate the true value add of a strong product manager and a strong product leader, which is restoring balance. There's no balance in AI. It just goes, like you said, it goes 100 miles an hour in any direction you ask it to. And what product managers should be doing is reining in, where should we go? Not just where could we go, but it's so easy to let, the tail wag the dog, where all of a sudden you find it's pulling you in every possible direction. And so I think it's very important to maintain balance. Product managers need to stay laser focused on where should we be going, not just where could we go and how would we get there if we did want to go there. And again, back to balance, it's like you are always, as a product manager, going to have way more requests and requirements than you could ever or should ever deliver, than your product could ever commercially benefit from or your customers could ever properly benefit from. And so it's not in your interest to pursue every idea. The strategic thought should be focused on which ideas are worth pursuing and then doing those incredibly well.
Well, and back to the idea that, it's incredibly hard to say no. You get a lot of good ideas and now you want to go do all those ideas. And you just can't do all of them.
Yeah.
So was there a moment when you lost balance and learned something important from that fallout?
Oh my gosh. So many, too many to count. I feel like a lot of the software projects I have worked on, I come into them and they are out of balance already. And it's really hard once you're out of balance to swing back. I think what I've learned is that continuing to expect a product and a tech team to deliver when they're already behind, and the floodgates are open as far as additional requirements, additional requests, is a recipe for disaster. I had an experience. I joined a team and I discovered that there were 72 product priorities they were expecting tech to deliver in the next 12 months that were just, had been in the backlog and I put them up on Post-it notes all around the room and just asked the leadership team to look at this and say, on what planet do you think this is ever going to happen? How can you look at all of this? And I got a lot of nods and a lot of agreement. Oh, yes, that's much too many. Here, let's pare it down. But the paring it down, you'd be amazed how quickly, within weeks, half of them were sneaking back in. Oh, but no, I really need this one. Really, why? And what I would learn is from the very highest levels in your organization, you need leadership to support you in saying no and sticking to it. And that is so much harder done than said. So the takeaway from that is absolute discipline to maintain balance so that you don't put your teams in a position where they're set up to fail. Because once they're set up to fail and they start failing, then they expect failure. Then failure becomes no big deal. Then you've lost the entire project pretty much, because getting that horse back in the stable after it's bolted is virtually impossible.
Yeah, that does sound like it would be a very tricky situation to turn around once people learn to expect failure. And I think one of the things we've already in this first part of this conversation kind of talked around is the fact that balance is very much people focused. And one thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently is that the biggest currency we have to spend is how we make people feel. When we lose balance, maybe we're stressed or we're frustrated, that currency can be spent poorly. And that leads to some of these types of situations that you're talking about. And realistically, this whole game of keeping this thing in balance is a people game and how you interact with these other people. So how do you maintain balance when emotions run high?
Well, I should start by saying I have not always executed this with perfection. I've
None
certainly
of us have.
lost my cool plenty of times. So I speak from a place of, do as I say, not as I do. But I've tried to grow up a bit and mature and learn from my mistakes. And the biggest learning is just reset and keep it in perspective. Really reflect on yourself and your own tendencies. One thing I've learned about myself is I tend to reflect the energy people bring me. So if someone brings me really positive, really optimistic energy, I'll reflect and amplify that. But I have, in my past, I've struggled with when somebody comes at me with really negative energy, not to reflect and become defensive and try to defend my team. Learning to de-escalate situations rather than respond in kind has been something that I've really worked on with myself. I think the other thing is keep it in perspective. This is a job for most, most folks. And separate the people from their performance or the project. One of the things that I've learned in a lot of reading and research that I've done in this topic is that there's a very big difference between guilt and shame. And environments that operate on, I feel guilty because I didn't deliver on time. That's a natural feeling.
Yeah.
Being made to feel like I'm a bad person because I didn't deliver on time is a completely different ballgame. And that's toxic. That turns people off. So it's about helping people to know that they belong and that when we fail as a team and you still belong. Who you are as a person and who you are in the team is not tied to your performance or the project's performance. I think that's a critical separation because, the whole guilt and shame relationship, it works on the other end too. It works on the positive. I think so many overachievers I've seen have gotten to the point in their career where they conflate their self-worth with achievements. Like, I'm a good person because I did a good thing, rather than I'm a good person because our team got lucky, hit the market at the right time, whatever it might be. It's the same, it's equally toxic because what you're doing is eventually all teams fail and all teams miss deadlines. So if you conflate your self-worth on the positive, you're inviting shame into that realm because when you inevitably fail, you will feel the opposite.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because having been laid off before and having been laid off at a point where I was literally at peak performance, like firing on all fours and doing way more than any one person probably ought to be tasked with, it has nothing to do with your performance in that moment. And it's the same topic you're talking about here, where you've got to make that disconnect between those things because it's not a reflection on you as a person. It's more a reflection on the situation that you found yourself in.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth asking yourself and evaluating, what are the stories that I'm telling myself? What are the stories that my manager is telling me? And what are the stories that I'm telling my team? Are they stories of, we're a team whether we win or lose? Are they stories of we all belong and nothing you could do, positive or negative, is going to change how I feel about you as a teammate and a person? Or are you getting different stories, both internally, from below, and from above? Because sometimes you may be a person who naturally feels that way and treats other people that way. But if you're being managed by someone who's not, it's very easy to get sucked into that without even realizing it's happening, in my experience.
Yeah. Do you have a story of a time that happened?
Yes, I had an incredibly challenging relationship with a boss a few jobs ago, back in my history. And the first 6 months we worked together and worked on this project, things were going great. And there was this incredible team energy that was so positive and so optimistic. And then our first product launch failed, and it failed spectacularly. And the pressure started to come from the top down onto my manager, who then under that pressure really changed and started to take that out on team members in personal attacks, not just we've got to hit this deadline, in you didn't do this and because you can't do this and you're not capable of this, then we're not going to deliver. And I kind of didn't know how to respond in that situation. But I actually remember going into the office one day and starting realizing I was about to say something along those lines to somebody that reported into me. And I had to stop myself and have a real moment within myself to say, wait, hang on, what kind of manager do you want to be? not
Yeah.
what is the management style of this team, and are you just emulating that? Who do you want to be? And I had to have a very serious heart to heart with the leadership of that organization to say, I'm not going to work like this. So we got to figure something out.
And what was the outcome of that conversation?
Interestingly, the structure was changed so that I no longer reported into the person that I found it difficult to work with. Eventually, that person left the organization, but there were painful months of there being a real personal conflict there, just in very different managerial styles. But in the end, there were enough voices saying, I don't think this style of management really fits our culture, the culture we want to have. And so eventually that led to a change in that position.
Yeah, that is admirable that it led to a change and it wasn't just well, sorry, that's just the way it is here. Move on type moment.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of respect for the organization that I worked for at that time, and can say I'm still in touch with a lot of people that do work there, and that culture has changed dramatically since that time. And I stayed in that organization for another 2.5, 3 years after this incident, and the culture just continued to get more and more positive. So it makes a very big
that's good.
difference.
That's like the best you can hope for in that situation because it's
Absolutely
really easy to just say that's how it is and to keep moving down a path that some people might want to go down and others might not. So,
and one thing I should mention, I had the support of other peers. I think that was critical. I had other people that reached out to me and said, we see you, we see what's happening here, and it's not right. And I think if I hadn't had that, I don't know that I would have had the courage or the strength to stand up and say, I'm not going to manage people like this. This isn't right.
Yeah, that's a key part of it because that gave you the agency that you needed to actually make that step as opposed to believing that you're like the one person who holds this opinion and you just aren't a fit for the organization at that point.
Exactly. I mean, I listened to fantastic podcast recently with, I believe his name's Dr. Todd Rose, who wrote Collective Illusions, about this we are hardwired to conform and belong, and that self-silencing, when we don't show up as our authentic selves, can lead to burnout. It can lead to, really negative outcomes for people and with regard to their mental health. And that resonated with me. And thinking back in those times of like, you're hardwired to say, oh, this is just how this organization runs. I'm going to conform to that culture. It's actually much, much harder than I think we appreciate for people to step outside that and say, I'm not sure I agree with that.
No, and that kind of plays into why it's so hard to say no as a product manager too, because a lot of the times where you're in a situation where you have to say no, it's not about like, well, I just don't think that this makes sense. It's about, well, I don't think it makes sense, but now I've got to say no to the following people and they're going to have adverse reactions to that no. And am I going to have answers to all the questions that they're going to come at me with because, they're going to mount a campaign to try and turn that no into a yes. And that that's what you're going to be facing when you say no.
Yes, exactly. And will I still belong in this group if I say no?
Yeah. That's a very, very true statement there because, if you say no too many times, well, you're seen as the person who doesn't want to play along with where we really want to take things. And with so much product direction being set generally higher than a product manager, you definitely find yourself in that situation.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a whole chapter of my book dedicated to it with my old colleague, a good friend and colleague who labeled me Chief Poo-Poo Officer. That was what he decided Chief CPO stood for. It was just because I would poo-poo everything and got really good at saying no. It was the only way we could get our, project back on track, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that kind of brings me to my next point, which is that product management is mostly about influence. And, to be the one saying no all the time, well, you're definitely making an influence, whether you want to or not at that point. You are influencing decisions. But then when things start actually working because you've said no so many times, that earns you a lot of respect just for being the person who's willing to do that. Influence does drive change, and that change requires motivation. Balance is very critical here, especially when we need to stay neutral on things. So how does balance help you remain a trusted neutral party when guiding change?
Well, I think, and I've learned this as a parent probably as much as a manager, especially of teenagers,
Oh,
that people people don't change their behavior or their beliefs very often because they were told to. They change behaviors and beliefs when those behaviors or beliefs are aligned to their internal compass. And so balance is about less because I said so and more what can you contribute to helping us as a team achieve our goals. And so when I say no to a team that's asking for, software delivery that's just not possible or not our priority, it's about helping that team to understand, look, these are the goals of the organization. And while this is very important to you, we are a team. And this is what, as a team, we have decided we're going to focus on, So bringing them on that journey, not just no for no's sake. That's really important to help, what's the internal compass of that team member, of that person, and how do I work within that to help them to see things from the perspective. And not everybody will all the time, but sometimes, people who really don't, if you give them time, try to get a message that resonates and give them time, eventually they do come around.
yeah. 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 And thinking about it, one of the ways that we can build currency is through connection. And when we think about others, we tend to achieve greater success. So people support ideas when they feel connected to us, kind of what we've been talking about just right here. Even in hiring, it's not just about skills. It's not about what's on that resume. It's about forming a meaningful connection. And there's certainly in a job interview, you've got a very limited time in which to actually try and create that meaningful connection. So how do you build genuine connections in your work?
I think the first thing is keep my ego in check. And I think the higher I've gone up in the leadership ladders of organizations, the more important that becomes, because the higher you go up in leadership ladders, typically the bigger the egos get. Quite often, not always, but quite often. And I think one of the things I've observed that's really interesting is like when you start out, let's say at the bottom, entry level at your organization, it's very acceptable for you to not know things and for you to have a learner mindset of, oh, I don't understand that. I've never heard that before. Can you tell me more? It's much easier to listen and be open-minded down there. When you're in higher in mid-management, management, or just, top principal in your field, or, if you've just been in the job for a long time, if you're more mature, I think it's harder to say, I don't know what you mean. I don't understand. Can you please explain that to me? Because you're kind of expected to know everything at that point. Kind of like your kids look at you and go, well, Mom, how do you not know that? Just like if you're a manager, sometimes it feels that way. If your team looks at you and goes, how do you not know which way we should go here? And that's ego. That's ego telling you a story that you're supposed to know everything because you're in charge. So keep that in check and put that voice to one side and be confident enough to say, haven't got a clue how we should handle this, and that builds connections, showing vulnerability, showing that you're not perfect. You don't know everything. I think the other thing is listen, properly listen. Don't listen waiting to tell people why you know everything and what you should do. Remain open-minded and build trust and safety, and listening and remaining open-minded and expressing your vulnerability and being clear about what you know and what you don't know is a great way to build trust and safety, because then other people will feel this is a place where I can be vulnerable too.
Mm-hmm. So what role would you say that empathy plays in creating that influence and trust?
It's so obvious, but it's be kind to others. We're all on this journey together, and we could all be found to be to blame for any failure of an organization, right? Or sometimes it's completely out of our hands. But for blame to survive in an organization, it needs that othering factor. It's very hard to blame someone for whom you have great empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we look at the challenges and the failures that we're facing through the person that we kind of default maybe naturally in our heads to say, oh, it's sales' fault or it's operations' fault or it's tech's fault. Sit down. If you can't imagine why they've done what they've done, try to sit with them. Because what I found, the more time I spent like getting into the weeds of teams, like, why didn't you deliver what I thought you were going to deliver? Or why did this feature come out completely different than the requirements said it was going to? People make decisions. They typically have very good reasons for making decisions. And, some of the anecdotes in the book really lay out like how easy it is for us to it's all our assumptions that we're making as to why somebody did it a different way than we thought they were going to, or why they didn't deliver because they actually got distracted doing this over here and not doing what we thought they were going to do. Empathy is how you overcome that kind of human instinct to go, well, it's tech's fault. They need to sort themselves out,
Mm-hmm. Well, in some of those cases, you get started doing exactly what you've been asked to do, and then you find a new constraint that wasn't considered or wasn't known at the time. And it's just that discovery process. Sometimes that happens well outside the product team's influence. And if you don't do the work to then uncover what was discovered, you might not find why things didn't get done the way they did.
Exactly. And I've seen it happen in teams where there's low empathy. Teams start to deteriorate. And I've seen tech teams go, well, I'll just deliver exactly what you asked for. I'm not going to think critically about it. I know it's not going to work because you've overlooked this workflow. You've overlooked this element you're going to need. But you know what? You don't trust me. And all you want is me to hit a deadline. So I'm just going to deliver exactly what you asked for and good luck using it. That's what blame, tension looks like. And it's not pretty because then sales or operations or whoever the customer, who the feature's for, I like to think you wouldn't release it to a customer like that, but whoever the feature's for comes back and says, well, this doesn't work for me. We go, well, I know. Well, I want to add this. Okay, well, you're at the back of the queue now. I'll talk to you in 6 months. It's like, it's way worse than if you just work through those challenges together as a team.
Yeah. And speaking to that, you really do need to foster collaboration and have people feeling good about the work that they're doing. And some of the ways that you can get there are through creativity and humor, which can very much be the key to actually what you need to do to meet user needs and market demands, which isn't something we spend a lot of time talking about. You don't go to a lot of like product management training or business training and they say, well, you need to be creative and you need to be humorous. What does creativity mean to you as a product leader, and how do you foster that in your teams?
I think software building is inherently a creative process. And I think a lot of people will probably laugh. They would think that was me being humorous. but it's true. It's like, how often you think about engineers, and I like the analogy of like to show how different software building is. You think about building an assembly line to make, say, a car. The engineers engineer the car, they build a prototype, and then they kind of deconstruct it and build an assembly line so that you can pump out a high volume of cars. Software is completely different in the sense that the engineers build the software to do the thing. You don't build a prototype and then pump out millions of them. So every bit of code is a creative process that you're not really sure. You think about how many iterations go into that first prototype car to get it right. There's creativity in that element, but not creativity in the pumping out of mass volume. So with software, once it's shipped, you're maintaining it, but you're pretty much done. You're not pumping out huge volumes of assembled products. So it's a far more creative process. Every, release candidate has creativity in it. And so I think when we overlook that, or when we kind of undermine it, or we don't appreciate it, I think we are doing ourselves a disservice. So I think one of my favorite things that we used to do with one of the tech teams I worked with was, like a periodic Friday, just, whether it's a hackathon or whether it was something to get us out of some fun project to just code creatively and get us out of the humdrum. That would be the first thing to go when project deadlines started to loom and people got stressed. But actually, we found we were much more effective if we left it in, because people just need a reset. And your brain might solve a problem over, there while you're thinking over here. And so it actually carries a lot of intangible benefits as well.
Yeah, there's two very interesting things that you just said there. And one of them is just that software is creative versus this manufacturing where you have to get it right and then you stamp it out 5 million times. You kind of hear the feedback that, oh man, software should have all these extra controls on it because if software were, manufacturing process X, it would fail all the time because it's so broken and it's got so many bugs in it. And, they manufacture these things and it's perfect every single time. But you're right, you have to get to the perfect design before you can stamp out the millions versus every release has some creativity to it. And because of that, yeah, there's going to be bugs. Yeah, there's going to be issues. That's just the inherent nature of the beast. It's not that software is any less of a discipline or held to less standards. It's just the inherent nature of what you're doing.
You can't compare a release candidate to a car that you drive off the lot. You got to compare that release candidate to the first prototype of that car they ever tried to build, and it probably didn't drive.
Yeah, so good luck comparing the two at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, then also the other point that was really interesting to me is just this whole idea of how you have to get your brain away from the thing that you're focused on so much because it's in those moments of not thinking about it that you actually like free up the space in your brain for your brain to do the background tasks, to do the background thinking, and then to have that aha moment when you least expect it. I mean, I'm sure most of us have all like woken up in the middle of the night with a revelation about something or have been off doing something completely different and had that, oh, that's how we do that moment. But if you don't take that time away from the thing, the moment doesn't come.
100%. I totally agree. Stressed out, burned out people in back-to-back meetings all day do not have aha moments. They just don't.
We talked about creativity. Humor can also break the ice and reduce stress, but it could also backfire. So, how do you navigate that line of appropriateness and cultural awareness?
This one's a minefield. My gosh, I'll probably put my
Simple
foot in my
questions
mouth.
here.
Yeah, trying to answer it. So I'll just speak from myself. I mean, I think fundamentally, if we understood each other better and we had better personal connections, we'd be less likely to offend each other. If we had greater resilience and greater interpersonal skills, we'd be more capable of gently correcting someone who's made a joke that didn't land well or could possibly cause offense. I personally believe that possibly offending someone with a joke or failing to interject humor is not enough reason to forget laughter altogether. I don't want fear of failure to mean that we never laugh. Gosh, what a bleak place that would be. But I think the key thing is understanding where the intention is. I've had people make jokes that I could take offense to, but I don't because I know that's not how they mean it. And so, if I was the best person I want to be, I might gently mention to them, hey, that could come out wrong. Then I can't say I've always been strong enough to do that in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, certainly if someone is making a joke that is meant to belittle, is meant to put someone down or undermine someone or make someone feel bad, that is unacceptable. And back to that, the whole self-silencing thing I mentioned before, like that's not good for anybody, for people to stand by and let that happen without speaking up. But I think, it's about understanding that. And that can be really hard. What's someone's intention here? I think we'll all be better off if we're able to ask that question, like, what do you mean by that? That's probably a bit wishful thinking to think that people are going to all be that comfortable in every situation to do that. But I think being humans and connecting and also not like subscribing to cancel culture. If someone says something that offends you, you don't have the right to walk around this earth not being offended your whole life, as Ricky Gervais so thoughtfully said. It doesn't mean it's right, but it doesn't mean that the person is a bad person necessarily either. Maybe they don't understand why it's offensive, or maybe they do. Maybe they are a jerk. Who knows? The best thing we can do in any of those situations is open up a conversation. But I think in my experience, 95% of the jokes dropped in an office are not offensive. Hopefully even higher than that. Hopefully it's 99%. And so I think we've got to keep laughing and keep our chins up if sometimes somebody says something that comes out wrong or, we don't understand where it came from.
Well, and you said it really well. You really have to understand what somebody means by that, because just because the words come out of their mouth one way and you hear it one way, that may not be what their intent was or what they thought they were saying, because there can be just those differences in language and understanding, and all of us bring those different backgrounds to life. So actually asking the question, well, okay, that hit me a little bit off. What did you actually mean by that? What do you think you said? And having that conversation can be very helpful But as you also said, we've got to live and laugh, and we don't want to lose that. So can you share a time from your past where humor has helped on the job?
Yes. I mean, I mentioned before being called instead of chief product officer, chief poo-poo officer. And that was hilarious. And it really broke the tension of me having to say, we have we have 295 requirements in our backlog and we're only going to deliver 5 of them. So I'm just going to start saying no. And it was the head of sales, as I said, and sales are notorious for asking for new features and new products and everything
Yeah.
else. And the fact that he and I were able to laugh about it, and we had a great
Yeah.
relationship. We had worked together for a long time. And then we were able to laugh about it in front of everybody else. And I was able to
Mhm.
take on that role. And so then it gave me the freedom for the next 6 months in any meeting where somebody asked for something, I'd be like, Chief Poo Poo Officer coming in to say that's not going to happen. And everybody would kind of laugh. And it just took the tension out of it, out of saying no.
Yeah.
And it became an inside joke with all of us. And then the first time I said, right, now we've got space in the product roadmap, let's have a discussion about what we can add to it. Everybody kind of cheered and went, yay, it's done. We kind of made it through the difficult period. So humor super helped in that scenario. And I'm sure there's plenty of others as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's points where the tension in a room is so thick you could cut it. And, like everybody's being as professional and just by the book as possible, and you have almost no human element in those rooms. And then if a joke lands, it is hilarious to watch how fast that unravels.
Yeah,
And it's even more fun to watch everybody then try to come back to that state of we're going to follow the book, because usually it doesn't happen.
absolutely.
So yeah, it's definitely fun when it does happen in a workplace context, because again, everybody's trying to be so serious, so heads down, so by the book, and then boom, it lifts it all off and says, "Oh yeah, we're all just people here," and moves you forward pretty well.
And it builds relationships.
Yeah, yeah, it absolutely does. Because I mean, in my case, I have a particular moment that I'm thinking of where the humor was inadvertent. I had a Freudian slip of the tongue, and I didn't mean to do that, but it broke the tension. And you're right, it built relationships. Those were in that moment. The absolute fastest path to build a relationship is to just have a humorous slip up right there and keep going, because immediately you show that you are human, but that you're also, committed to doing what it is you're doing. And even in the face of like having a slip like that, you're going to just move on and
Mhm.
help people out. So yeah, it's pretty amazing when that happens. And kind of following up on that, a creative and humorous culture often does lead to better collaboration and idea sharing, but that doesn't happen by accident that you get there. So, what are some practical ways to encourage creativity and positivity in teams?
Well, I think the first and the biggest one is you can't fake it. You actually have to live
Hmm.
it. You have to be creative. You have to be positive for your team to then follow in those footsteps, lead by example. And if you can't, ask yourself if your leader is creating the right environment for you and your team. Do you have, if you don't have the freedom to do those things or you're not feeling those things in your workplace, then maybe there are other things that need to change as well. I mean, one of the things I find is that the pace of corporate pressure is often stifling. And
Hmm.
so, one of the most practical things that I always try to put in place to varying degrees of success, I've had corporate leaders say, absolutely not, I'm not doing that. But I think it's so important is recognizing the false economy of pushing a product team in particular and, the teams that product supports into 8 hours of usually pointless and pretty grueling meetings all day, every day. Like when I look at a diary, and there have been times, especially as a product leader, where I would look at my diary and 60 to 75% of my week was recurring meetings. So like there was never going to be a week where I didn't have 60 to 75% of the working day already booked. That's insane. What am I getting done? What is the point of this? Meetings for meeting's sake. And so some of the things we've done would be implement a no meetings rule for either a certain day of the week, or for the hours, between 10 and 2, or between, like whatever you want it to be. I've spoken to a number of corporate leaders that won't even entertain this idea. because they want to be able to meet with who they want to meet with when they want to meet with them. But they underestimate how detrimental it is for the rest of the teams. And so, that is an absolute false economy. And it's really hard to be positive and be creative when all you're doing is Zoom meeting, conference room meeting. So, there's no thinking time. There's no time to have the aha moment to solve the problem. So I appreciate there are probably a lot of people listening going, yeah, talk to my manager or talk to my CEO about that. And I recognize that's really hard, but I would say, please try to make the case for it, because it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference having some blocks of time to actually do your work in working hours.
Well, and one thing that I found, having been, I guess victim is the right word to use, having been victim to meeting tunnels of where you're on the phone or you're in a conference room for just hours on end, and like 4 or 5 hours later, you come out of the meeting tunnel and you're just completely wiped. And honestly, you talk about having that thinking time, but this is the time after like 4 or 5 hours of meeting straight where I don't want to think at all.
Yeah.
I just want to go do something different. But it is allowing yourself that time to, okay, I might have just taken a bunch of new action items. I got some new perspectives on things that now I need to consider. I'm out of energy. I've just spent 4 or 5 hours talking to people. I'm done. That you just go do something different. Allow yourself to go do something different and get away from it, because, a day or two later, the aha moment might arrive that kind of pulls all of this together and says, oh, it wasn't as bad as you thought it was. Here's what you need to do to move forward on it.
Yeah, 100%. I'm the same. Whenever I get to that point, if I can, I go for a run. And it usually just is and I think some people meditate, some people go to yoga class or like whatever, finding that thing that helps you reset and bring your energy back is really important. And I love a 4-hour meeting if it's a brainstorming session where we're actually actively solving problems as a team. Like those are some of my favorite meetings and some of the best meetings I've ever had. And I will quite happily sit in a room for 8 hours and workshop something. I think where I get frustrated is when I'm in a 1-hour block for an update on this project, a 1-hour block for an update on that project, a 1-hour block.
Context switch, 1-hour block, context switch, 30-minute block. That's what we normally get.
Yeah. And then, 30-minute block for a one-to-one with this person, 30-minute block for one-to-one. And then you show up and you're like, what are we talking about today? I don't know. I'm exhausted. I've been going meeting to meeting. What do you want to talk about? I don't know. It's like, what is the point of that meeting? So yeah, I think it's about just really thinking critically about how we fill our time.
Yeah. So treating product as a creative endeavor and seeing the need to have balance in product. And, it's not just balance in product. Yes, we've been spending our time talking about product, but it's balance in life as well that has to be there before you can have balance in what you're doing in the office. Because if your life is out of balance, you're going to show up to work and that's where your mind's going to be. You're not going to be able to put the focus there. But all of this kind of builds into this creative perspective that you have in product management. And how has that perspective given you an edge as a product leader?
I think technology teams really respond positively when I've worked with them, appreciating the creativity that comes and wanting my technology leaders to think critically and pairing with them. So I think one of the edges is to work incredibly collegiately and collaboratively with tech to say, this is the problem I'm trying to solve. In my head, this is how we solve it. But you tell me, is there a better way? Get creative. Tell me how to solve this problem. Tell me what I'm not thinking of. Tell me, really create agency and empowerment and a flow of creative ideas back and forth between product leader who hopefully understands the commercial and customer facing requirements and the tech team who really understand the technical possibilities. I think that's an edge. Like there have been so many times where I'm like, oh, I never even knew doing it that way would just be possible, with tech changing the way it is. That's a huge edge. And it comes down to product managers, engineers, and, everybody else who makes up a stakeholder in these projects, given the trust and freedom to solve problems creatively. Micromanagement in these roles, especially the bigger your organization is absolutely toxic and stifling. And you're not going to get the best out of product or tech people by micromanaging them, in my opinion and in my experience. And so I think trust and freedom are how you build a team that's going to deliver something interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So what advice would you give to those who are early in their career as a product manager and they're now trying to balance this whole world of how do I find balance? How do I use creativity and humor? How do I kind of get myself in with the different people that I'm around and maybe have to deal with tricky people situations?
Well, I think the first thing is to make sure you honor your own time, give yourself time for creative thought and set boundaries around that. Sometimes it's easier to set boundaries from the outset. If you're relatively new, kind of coming into a role, to say it's really important to me that I have set periods of time in which I'm problem solving, strategic thinking, and then, the rest of my diary is available for meetings. And I know that's hard because you are balancing, everybody wants to talk to you as a product manager because everybody wants to pitch their idea and ask for something else for you to build. But I think that's getting out in front of that and being disciplined around that's really important. Also, find the funny side of things. That can be really hard when you have a manager who wants you to take it very seriously, right? I get that that's really difficult, but regardless of how your manager wants you to take it, try to keep perspective on, is this really life or death? Or am I just being asked to carry a burden that is bigger than the deadline associated with this project? Try to find it funny when you realize that something got delivered completely off base because of some silly miscommunication or some wonky old code you were trying to fix. And let your team members find it funny. Give them permission to put their hand up and be like, I really messed this up. And you'll find it funny as to why I really messed it up. Because again, that freedom to be vulnerable, that freedom to laugh at our own mistakes is incredibly empowering. And it's amazing how many environments I've worked in where that is not allowed. That's frowned upon. And I think it's one of the biggest differences between, I talk about in my book, the concept of a lean startup versus a chunky corporate. And I think lean startups, everybody laughs at failure. You're expected to fail because you're starting out. But when you get to chunky corporate, there's a lot less of that. And so I think if you really want to be lean, learn to laugh at your mistakes because there's going to be loads and you're innovating. So you're trying to make mistakes.
So number one tip to a chunky corporate who wants to be lean is just laugh.
Yeah, 100%. Don't take it so seriously. But I appreciate that's incredibly hard to do when you have a board breathing down your neck.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of big egos in the room. No, they don't. No, they don't. Yeah. And
humor
so
is usually not welcome in the boardroom. No.
No, it is not. And, and so then maybe the question is this the kind of environment I want to work in?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's an unanswered question. That's one you have to answer for yourself. So one final question so that the audience can get to know you a little bit better. What's one small habit or ritual that keeps you grounded when life gets chaotic?
Yoga and running for me. I can tell a difference in my mood massively if I miss either of those things out of my kind of weekly routine. And it's the reset. It's the get out of my own head time to relax.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so important. And when you miss that, you start to lose that balance, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Oh, the other one I should probably say is actually way more important is my morning coffee. A quiet, peaceful coffee with no distractions yet.
Yeah, there is something about that. I do that myself, and it is very much a part of my morning. And I was thinking about that this morning. It's like, why do I take all this time? This time that you could be doing other things with, but it's time that you're basically just sitting there with a cup of coffee. But you're right. It's a moment to reset and a moment to just let the thoughts simmer so that you aren't just jumping into it and 2-3 hours later going, now what did I do? That's that moment to actually think about things. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show again, and thank you so much for your insights today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. As always, it's been an absolute delight speaking with you.
That's Productly Speaking, brought to you by the letters P and M. If this one resonated, subscribe and pass it along. Real stories travel best by word of mouth. You can find us at www.productlyspeaking.com or on LinkedIn. I'm Carl Abbott. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.